It is one thing to be scared when watching a movie. It is entirely else to feel as though you've encountered something terrifying for the very first time while playing a video game. After moving in a more action-oriented path with games like Resident Evil 4, modern horror games have experienced something of a revival in recent years thanks to titles like Dead Space and Outlast that place a fresh emphasis on evoking terror and tension. This comes after the genre had begun to move in this way with games like Resident Evil 4. When it comes to gaming experiences and scare tactics, the potential for ever-increasing levels of fright is directly proportional to the level of advancement in graphic technology. There are a lot of games that are capable of scaring the bejesus out of you, but if you want to play the games that are truly terrifying, you should look no farther than these 5. Let's get started, but first subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon. Number 5. Aliens Isolation. When Isolation was released in 2014, fans of the Aliens franchise had every reason to be wary of the movie. Given that they had watched the terrible Aliens, Colonial Marines only a year earlier, it would be an extreme understatement to suggest that their faith in the Alien franchise had reached an all-time low at that point. Isolation's developer, Creative Assembly, which was not responsible for Colonial Marines, was obviously aware of this problem, given the company is responsible for delivering the most successful Alien game to date. Isolation brought the series back to its horror roots and served as somewhat of a love letter to Ridley Scott's first film in that it maintained and expanded upon the terrifying ideas that were presented in the film. In this game, there is just one alien and the players share a ship with it. In contrast to Colonial Marines, which included multiple aliens, it is impossible to kill, and it follows the player around persistently, which adds to the tense and horrifying nature of the game. Number 4. Silent Hill 2. Back when the first PlayStation was released, the Silent Hill titles, along with Resident Evil, were crucial in helping to define the modern horror game genre. It was one of the early big releases for the PlayStation 2, the second game in the series, and it received excellent reviews at the time. Its legacy has only risen over the years since it was first released. The video game takes place in the made-up town of Silent Hill, which is located in the United States and places an emphasis on psychological horror. In this game, escaping from opponents is frequently a much more viable decision than fighting them in combat. The narrative design of the game is also one of its strengths, as a significant portion of the narrative gets its impetus from things that are found in the environment as well as from the town itself. It is still generally agreed upon that Silent Hill 2 is the best game in the long-running Silent Hill series, and it consistently ranks towards the top of lists of the best video games of all time. Number 3. Dead Space. In 2008, the first installment of the Dead Space series caused a significant stir in the video game industry. It is deserving of all the praise that is heaped upon it for its role in kicking off the revival of the horror genre in the late 2000s. Dead Space is a first-person shooter video game that takes place on a derelict mining spaceship known as the Ishimura. Players take the role of Isaac Clarke, an engineer who finds himself in the position of needing to survive a mystery alien disease that has infested the ship and eradicated its crew. Isaac, a protagonist of Dead Space, is evocative of Ripley, the main character of one of the most successful sci-fi horror films, Alien, which was directed by Ridley Scott and released in 1979. Dead Space acts as a tribute to Alien because of this similarity. Both of these people are civilians, which means they have to rely on their wits and their expertise in order to stay alive. In addition to this, the game debuted a cutting-edge dismemberment system for its combat, which required the player to cut off the limbs of their foes before they could be defeated. The original game in the series and its sequel are both tremendously horrifying and help push the horror gaming genre to new heights, but the franchise took a bit of a step back with the release of the more action-oriented Dead Space 3. Number 2. Resident Evil. The Resident Evil series experienced something of a sophomore slump after the release of Resident Evil 4. The cost for the game skyrocketed, and the never-ending action extravaganza gained precedence over any of the terrifying elements. It all culminated in RE6, which included hours of explosions and vehicle chases, only to be received with overall disinterest from critics and gamers alike in the gaming community. The game's developer, Capcom, interpreted it as a sign that some aspects of the franchise needed to be updated in order to remain relevant. The developers of Resident Evil 7 made the decision to take the franchise back to its beginnings by placing the player in an abandoned Louisiana mansion filled with a large number of monsters seasoned with Cajun spices and a limited supply of ammunition. You now navigate the maze-like corridors of the Baker estate from a first-person perspective, which adds to the sense of claustrophobia you get from being there. This is one of the most terrifying horror games because it features support for virtual reality, which gives the player the impression that they are actually within a house of horrors. The majority of the gameplay components from RE7 were carried over into Resident Evil Village, which was released as Resident Evil 8 in 2021. Number 1. Outlast. To tell you the truth, Outlast is a terrifying game on a level that makes Amnesia, the Dark Descent, seem like a relaxing vacation. The player takes control of a reporter who infiltrates a secluded mental institution undetected in order to investigate rumors of awful occurrences. There is a wide variety of upsetting imagery, in addition to foes that will pursue you throughout the hospital until they murder you. Outlast is another evidence that a first-person perspective is the most effective for horror games. As you hide under a filthy, blood-stained bed as a crazed, skeletal doctor enters the room in pursuit, you'll understand why. Outlast is available for Microsoft Windows, PlayStation 4, and Xbox One. You may download Outlast for free on PC, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Mac, but doing so is entirely at your own peril. You become a very courageous soul indeed if you can make it through even 1 hour of the game Outlast. Here are a few more as a bonus for you. Amnesia, the Dark Descent. It's possible that being chased by monsters is the scariest gameplay experience ever, especially when viewed from the first-person perspective. Being chased is a common occurrence in Amnesia, the Dark Descent, and if the sequences themselves don't drive you insane with fear, the darkness probably will. The video game Amnesia features a sanity meter that increases in value the longer you stare at terrible pictures and remain in the dark. The fact you have to sneak around in the shadows to avoid being seen by creatures is the problem. Because of this, the sheer act of concealing itself generates an interesting risk and reward dynamic as you are forced to put yourself in potentially dangerous circumstances just as frequently as you need to hide from them. This computer game is not for anyone who are easily scared or intimidated. Pathologic II. It is challenging to convey the entirety of Pathologic II in just a few paragraphs. The backdrop is based on the crumbling Russian Empire at the turn of the 20th century, and the game combines elements of a straightforward survival game with those of a mind-bending story about the plague and poverty. The objective of the game is for the player to exonerate themselves of an unjustified murder charge, while also avoiding infection by gathering supplies such as food, water, and antibiotics. Army Barak, the character you control in the game, is a physician. He eventually sets his sights on treating the disease that is sweeping across the game world, but he has only got a week and a half to do it before everything in the area is destroyed. Every character in Artemy's immediate vicinity is susceptible to falling ill, which can have devastating effects on the narrative of the game. Night after night, he is tormented by terrifying visions that get increasingly bizarre and incomprehensible as time passes. Stalker. When you stop and give it some thought, the radioactive wasteland of Chernobyl, which is located in the Ukraine, would be an excellent location for one of the most terrifying video games. This is especially true when you factor in radioactive mutants. Stalker is a first-person survival game that was initially released for the personal computer in the year 2007. The game takes place in an alternate reality in which there was a second nuclear explosion at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant which mutated the area's ecology, including the flora and animals. The gloomy, oppressive ambience and open-world layout of Shadow of Chernobyl are two of the game's most recognizable features. The real-world region of Chernobyl is one of the eeriest and most hazardous places on Earth. Hence, the idea of basing a video game on the idea of surviving in such a disturbing environment is likely one of the most unnerving gaming concepts that has ever been conceived of. So did you enjoy this list? Tell us in the comments and do like this video. Also, subscribe to our channel before leaving.